The power of the invite. So this is the presentation in and around leadership theory, to which I work to ascribe to for my practicum class. So some personal information. So I'm married to my wife, Lorna, for 16 years. I have twin boys, Reed and Preston, polar opposites. That is our obligatory quarantine pet proxies, 2-year-old pit mix. When I'm not working, I can be found doing sports, scouts, puzzles, just being outdoors. Professional experience, I did my undergraduate work at Emporia State in secondary business with a minor in math. Graduated from the University of Kansas with a master's in special education, high incidence, and then did my doctoral work at the University of Missouri, go Tigers, and where I studied leadership and policy analysis, and my dissertation was all about social and emotional learning in the secondary suburban classrooms. Teaching experience started at Harmon High School in Kansas City, Kansas, where I taught business, math, and special education over the course of a number of years. And then moved to Blue Valley North and Blue Valley Southwest, where I did emotional disabilities. And then worked at Shawnee Mission South with special education, high incidence, as well as department coordinator. I've also coached and worked in various other positions across the buildings. So the style leadership I aspire to show and reflect is an approach known as invitational theory and practice, or ITP. It's known as, it has other names like invitational education and invitational leadership as well. So invitational theory and practice, it capitalizes on the power of the invitation or the agreement made between leaders and followers. So it was first introduced in 1978 by William Perky, and then he brought on Jay Novak to do some studies to figure out how to help people, or how leaders can help followers realize their endless potential to make an impact on the greater good. How it impacted my learning and leading. I think the idea of an invitation is a very powerful idea and concept. It demonstrates that two parties come into a mutual understanding when the invitation is extended and accepted. So I think of that wedding invite by what is promised by the couple that's sending the invite, as well as what is promised by the person who's attending the wedding. So there is a mutual agreement there. So when I extend that into education and explore further, what is promised by the teacher or the leader, and what is promised by the student when accepting that invitation. So it's definitely a two-way street. The basics of ITP are grounded so leaders can have an others-focused mentality, comparable to the servant leadership theory. However, it's different in that it looks at how we can realize our own potential through the service of others. But these ideas also outline to leadership characterized by Tracy and Aguilar. It begins to highlight ethics and working with others to lead by emphasizing the followers and leaders' places in the community at large. So the three foundations are democratic ethos, is the idea that people count and grow through self-governance. Perceptual tradition is that behavior is based on the perception of the individual and their place in the larger community. And then self-concept theory, which is the perception of one's identity. So everything at the core of ITP, or invitational theory and practice, is known as I-CORT, is what they do, with intentionality being at the center of everything that is done, right? And then everything else is done through CORT, C-O-R-T, which is outlined here. And this is kind of a graphic that was used in much of the research. So everything is done with care. Everything is optimistic, so looking towards being positive outcomes, looking that everything's going to work. Respect, so having respect for others, their community, those people that you're leading and who are following you, as well as the greater population. And then trust that you're going to do what is best for the community at large. So that I-CORT is one of the backbones of invitational theory and practice. So why? So when we start talking about invitational theory and practice, you have to consider the 5 P's is what we talk about. So the 5 P's are people, places, processes, policies, and programs. They utilize a starfish analogy to do this, and because a starfish, when it grabs onto a mollusk or grabs onto a shell, to crack the shell, it always uses 4 of the 5 appendages. So one appendage is always resting while the other 4 are putting pressure on the shell to crack it open. So in their theory and in this thought is that if you have to improve one of these P's, so to speak, the other 4 are working, are continuing to work. So this is a adaptation from Young and Schnelling that emphasizes the educational model of the 5 Ps. So places are classrooms that create an engaging learning environment. policies or rules that demonstrate focus on the importance of learning and require fairness and equity for all. Processes is consistent, fair, transparent processes that encourage and reward participation and engagement. People is treating people as individuals, supporting their needs even when that is difficult or unappreciated. And programs is learning that is sequenced and content-rich and engaging lessons, encouraging student participation. So those are just some small examples. When I do professional development in and around ITP, I really have people try to list out and parse out what falls into these 5 Ps so they can really look at what is they're doing in their classroom and where they can look to improve and where they can look to hold steady. So there's a 4 square kind of organization when it comes to invitational theory. And as an organization and as an individual, we all fall into one of these categories. So the least desirable or the worst is going to be this bottom right hand where you are being unintentionally disinviting. Or, I'm sorry, the worst one is intentionally disinviting right here. So you're purposely insulting or not engaging with others. The 5 Ps are not inclusive, creating an unhealthy environment altogether. So there's purposeful disconnect and purposeful exclusion of people. Probably then the next worst one then would be the unintentional disinviting. And that's the lack of consistency, communication, direction, can lead to individuals or groups being left out. So you're not being intentional about your invitation, but there's no consideration for others as far as how they're going to be impacted by those policies or those programs that you're putting into place. So then they're left out just by default, not by purposeful design. So then you move into unintentional inviting. So this is where you'll have success as a teacher, as an organization, but without purpose. So natural success is happening, but it's not sustainable or transferable. So in other words, that organization or that person can be experiencing success, but it could just be their natural given talent and not anything they're actually doing purposefully with care or with consistency so that they could train others to do it, right? It's not easily duplicated and it's not carried out. And oftentimes organizations or people who have this unintentional inviting spirit, they can't typically put their finger on what is making them successful. They just say, well, it's just something I do. Invitational or intentional inviting is going to be purpose and consistency, allow for all to feel included. Success is easy to sustain and transfer to others. So, and that's from the top down. So when we start talking about invitational theory and practice, we're looking at the organization as a whole, as well from those frontline people, as far as like teachers in a school building. You're talking about teachers, but you're also talking about office staff, the nurses, the custodians, the cafeteria workers. All the people that are there need to make everybody feel invited. So there is intention around everything that's being done, and everyone is always considered when making new policies or programs or implementing different processes. The other thing I like about invitational theory and practice is that it comes with a change model as well for adoption, and this change model can also be adopted for other programs that you want to implement or other things you want to do. So it comes in 3 phases. It's 12 steps, and they call it the double helix because it looks like this helix kind of spiraling up. So when you start talking about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, you're really looking at your occasional interest. You're looking at initial exposure. You're having dialogue in and around what you want to try. You're coming to some general agreements, and then you are uncoordinated use and sharing. So that's going to be maybe you have a sprinkling of people who are trying it in isolation to come back and then see what's working and what's not. Then you come into an intensive study of, gathering that data and looking to see what is working, applying then what it is you're learning, start organizing it into strands, and then you start looking at a global systematic incorporation. And then from there you go into leadership development, in-depth analysis, confrontation of major issues, and then transformation, right? And then you can see too at the top they have this awareness, understanding, application, and adoption, right? So each of these 3 phases are broken down into 4 steps. And I use this model overlaid it onto social emotional learning and the adoption that was put forth by Maurice Elias, for my own dissertation as well, because this model fits into many different into many different aspects. So it's a very useful and almost universal model for adopting change as well. And this would also be when you look into invitational theory and practice. This also is what the governing body, the ITAP, and they use when they're looking at schools to recognize as invitational schools as well. I think examples of ITP in practice, due to the lack of knowledge around ITP, it's not a very well-known leadership theory. There's not many leaders that are specifically working or identifying this as a theory, so that's one problem in this. I would contest that most do work towards it unknowingly, because being invitational is also being welcoming and having great culture. I think Dr. Dane at Shawnee Mission South, where I work, he's created a very inviting culture. We have very little turnover as far as teachers go. We have students who want to be in the building. In the 5 years I've been there, we've experienced growth in students when we're in a district that does allow transfers. So we definitely have people who are seeking to come here. We have teachers who have sought out Dr. Dane when there's openings in the building to come in. And our front office staff, custodians, have a hard time leaving because of the culture that has been created. And that is due in part to Dr. Dane. And I also think that that can be replicated. There is some purposeful intent in and around some of the things that he does and that he leads to allow others to feel welcomed and invited into that space. So these are just a few of my references here. And thank you so much.